Let's talk about EV trucks and whether electric power is really the future for heavy haulage vehicles, or whether it's a pipe dream. This has become an issue because Mercedes/Daimler have recently released the Mercedes-Benz eActros truck. It shows us that there is a pathway forward to EV vehicles entering the heavy haulage space. However, there definitely are some hurdles they will need to overcome, which the eActros has not quite surmounted. So let's have a look at what the eActros is, and then we can look at whether EVs are really suitable for the heavy haulage and long haulage situation. So the Mercedes-Benz eActros, basically it has two main specifications, and these really are going to correlate to the range of the truck. So at the low end, we have a battery specification which has three 105 kilowatt hour packs. This can increase to four 105 kilowatt hour packs. So the total kilowatt hours are going to range from 315 to 420. The range purports to be up to 400 kilometers. I emphasize up to 400 kilometers. This is around 250 miles, because this could easily decrease in real-world usage. For example, if the truck is hauling a lot of weight, if the truck is in stop-start traffic where it needs to accelerate heavily quite frequently, the range could easily decrease. If it needs to go up a lot of hills, easily decrease. So the range is obviously going to fluctuate. The total vehicle weight can be up to 40 tons. System output is around 400 kilowatts. This does not translate into a particularly fast truck. It will have around 536 horsepower or thereabouts. It will accelerate up to a maximum speed of 80 kilometers per hour. It's clearly going to be laborious, however potentially less laborious than an ordinary diesel-powered truck. Charging is also relevant for any EV, and no less so for the eActros. It can do fast charging. It can fast charge from 20% to 80% in a little bit over an hour under optimum conditions. So we're seeing some tech specs that look pleasant to begin with. However, there are some significant issues that the eActros needs to overcome for it to really be viable. And at this point, there are significant problems that could prevent this being an effective long haulage vehicle. Let's unpackage these. Let's now focus on range. The range is 400 kilometers under optimal conditions. Presumably, this would decrease if you've got the lower battery pack. So we're going to basically see potentially problematic range. Let's have a look at how this range compares in Germany, the country in which the truck was developed. Now in Germany, you might want to do intercity travel. This would often be the case if you need to transport things, between cities to deliver them. So for example, you might go Berlin-Hamburg, Berlin-Frankfurt, Berlin-Stuttgart. Those are going to be common routes for truck drivers. Now the distance between Berlin and Hamburg is around 289 kilometers. Remember, the range is 400 kilometers. This tells us the truck will potentially barely get from Berlin to Hamburg, because this 289 kilometers is going to increase a bit when you add on distances between depots and the like. The distances recorded between Berlin and Hamburg are really kind of the optimal distance here, and are from generic city centers. But certainly this could increase if you're going from depots. So we're seeing it about, say, 300 kilometers. This tells us one would barely make it to Hamburg in one trip. One could potentially run the risk of running out of charge before you even get there. That's important because Hamburg is a major city in Germany. It's a port city, a city where cargo might come in. The situation becomes worse if you're looking at Frankfurt or Stuttgart. Frankfurt is in the vicinity of 550 or more kilometers. It exceeds the range of the truck. If we're looking at Stuttgart, it is even longer than Frankfurt, again exceeding the range of the truck. Thus, to go from Berlin to Frankfurt or Berlin to Stuttgart, you would need to stop and charge somewhere in the middle. This would add on an hour, or potentially more than an hour, to a trip that was already taking potentially 5 or so hours. Automatically, you've lost a lot of time. This creates issues for efficiency, because it's clearly going to impinge the ability of these companies to get things delivered. If we're looking at Berlin and Hamburg, that's a trip that's about 3 hours and 5 minutes. It's the type of trip you would be able to easily do within half a day, and then potentially have some time left over for delivery and the like. But if you need to add on an hour or more of charging, then you end up taking this trip to being 4 or more hours. And this is both ways. So you end up with a situation where your trip suddenly becomes significantly less efficient. That's with intercity travel. Now what about inner city driving, where you just have a short haulage truck driving from a depot to deliver goods? Well, here the situation is more opaque and very much going to depend on how the truck is used. For some purposes, this will work. For example, say you have a depot in the city where you're storing cars and you send those out to be delivered within that city. Usually you'll only take one car. You'll get your truck, you'll take the car and you'll deliver it, and then you'll go back to your depot. That would typically be significantly under the 400-kilometer range, and then you'd be able to charge when you're picking up the next car potentially, depending on the situation in question. So in that circumstance, this could potentially work. However, say you're a furniture delivery company. You're on the road all day. You're going between various houses. Often your deliveries will be a few minutes. You're certainly not going to be sitting there charging your truck. You'll park at the curb. You'll take out your furniture. You'll offload it and then you'll leave. It's usually a quick delivery. No time to charge. In that circumstance, this probably would not be viable. The 400 kilometers probably is not going to do the job. Let's think about this. Say you're looking at Dallas. The distance between Plano and Dallas. Plano is effectively a suburb of Dallas, albeit to the north of Dallas. The distance between Plano and downtown Dallas is around 31 kilometers by car. That is potentially optimistic. It's going to depend a lot on the traffic and the like. But say you're doing that, and then you're traveling around Dallas. You're going to be traversing significant distances. You could potentially get under your 400 kilometers, but maybe just. You might need to do a charging stop in between your day, and automatically you're adding on an hour-long break for this charge. It will depend a lot on the usage, of course, and in some cases, it certainly is not going to be viable. In some cases, it will be viable. It will depend a lot on exactly how the truck is being used. So it may be viable for some very specific use cases, where you don't need to transport very much, and you are not going to be on the road for each individual delivery for a significant period of time. So in short, viability is going to vary a significant amount for inner city usage. The next issue I'd like to address is speed. It will go up to a maximum speed of 80 kilometers per hour. 80 kilometers per hour is not fast. 80 kilometers per hour is certainly under the speed limit in many inner city areas. However, it certainly is not going to be a very fast speed. In many cases, going on highways, you'll be going significantly faster than this. It makes the truck not very useful for situations where you are going to be on highways. You could go much faster using a diesel truck, albeit potentially with slower acceleration, but still faster overall. As a result, it's not really going to work. For example, in Australia, say you wanted to go between Sydney and Newcastle. Sydney and Newcastle is not a very long distance. You could potentially do it on one charge with this truck. Because there's a major highway, the maximum speed is significantly higher than 80 kilometers per hour. So as a result, you're going to end up going very slowly. Granted, in many cases, the regulators do put speed limits on trucks. However, it certainly would not be 80 kilometers per hour in general terms. So in our Sydney to Newcastle scenario here, that's 170 kilometers, so about half the range. You'd need to charge if you were to do a return trip. However, for much of that, the speed limit is over 100 kilometers per hour. As a result, you're going to see trucks going significantly slower with the eActros. So we're seeing issues with range and with speed, potentially also with capacity, given that it's only got a limit of up to 40 tons. What then about long haulage? Long haulage runs into even bigger issues. I've already mentioned the fact that the eActros would not even go between cities. But say you've got a long haul truck, you put in more batteries into that long haul truck to make it go between those cities. Say you were to do that. Let's have a look at a long haul truck. In the United States, the maximum weight of a long haul truck is 80,000 pounds. That's the absolute maximum weight imposed by regulators. Whether or not the truck could hold more, it's irrelevant. Maximum weight is 80,000 pounds. Each truck tractor, excluding the load, the truck tractor, so just the cab, is going to be around 35,000 pounds. That admittedly is going to include perhaps a couple of thousand pounds of fuel. So you're seeing there potentially a heavy truck. Now, in most cars, the batteries are going to be around about a quarter of the weight of the car. So we're seeing these being about 500 kilograms in the Tesla Model S. For a long-haul truck, it'll probably be more proportionally speaking. The reason that's the case is simply because when you've got these battery packs, they will go you a certain distance. A long-haul truck needs to go longer, hence the name long-haul truck. It certainly is not going to make do with a Tesla battery. So you're going to see in proportionate terms, the weight of the battery is increasing the weight of the car. So for example, if you've got a 35,000 pound tractor, you could easily see at least a good 20,000 pounds of additional battery weight. Potentially 15,000 if we're being generous. Now granted, 2,000 of those 35,000 pounds were fuel. So let's take those out and say the tractor is 30,000 pounds. Let's assume that's the case for the moment. So assuming that's the case, we've then got batteries that need to be added to this. Add on another 15,000 pounds, although I dare say it's going to be much higher given the need for longer range than with an ordinary car. So 15,000 pounds at the low end, I'd say 30,000 pounds is probably going to be the higher end. Say it's 30,000 pounds, that leaves you 20,000 pounds of cargo left. If it's 15,000 pounds, your total truck rate has gone up to 45,000 pounds, whereas before it was around 30,000 pounds or thereabouts, or 30 to 32,000 pounds. As a result, you've automatically lost 15, maybe 20,000 pounds of your haulage, simply by virtue of having these batteries. This is a significant problem, because in the United States, most trucks go close to the 80,000 pound limit. They go close to the 80,000 pound limit, primarily because it's super inefficient to have to make more trips. So they'll try to get as high as humanly possible. Therefore, most trucks in the US are close to the 80,000. If you take out 15,000 from that limit, you're going to need to make another trip because you're simply not able to carry as much. So you need to do another trip. That adds on expense, adds on inefficiency. The EV trucks then become significantly less viable. The moment you need to add on another trip, they become unviable. EV trucks are therefore not going to be particularly useful for truck transport at this point in time. Now, if we add on to this the issues with range, I've not addressed with long-haul trucks how often they'd need to charge. Trucks will usually need to refuel. Truck drivers will spend a day on the road and then will obviously sleep. They would not be taking an hour-long break every 3 to 4 hours, which is what might be mandated with these type of EV situations. And if, for example, they're taking a break every 3 to 4 hours, an hour to charge, that won't get them to full charge, of course, because of the number of batteries. Let's say they're taking those types of breaks. Then you'll end up adding on potentially a couple of hours each day just in terms of charging breaks. Significantly inefficient use of time, not viable as a truck company. Say, for example, they're only charging once per day. That could potentially work, because then they could charge it overnight. However, in general terms, that would unlikely to be the case. Will an EV battery really last you 8 hours of continuous driving? Will the EV battery really go that long? Say the truck driver breaks every 4 hours. That truck driver won't necessarily take a break for an hour. That truck driver might take a break for half an hour or so. Say that were the case, then you still won't get to full charge, and you're going to still end up with these same issues. In essence, batteries at this stage reduce the amount of cargo that can be hauled by too much. They potentially reduce the range of the truck and potentially reduce the maximum speed. All of these factors reduce the viability of batteries for long-haul trucks. As a result, at the moment, they're not ready for prime time. However, batteries and EV trucks could be useful for short haul at the moment. Now, this has so far sounded negative. However, there are improvements in battery technology all the time. Tesla keeps improving the efficiency of their batteries, either by making them more dense or by reducing the weight of various other components, such as the casing around batteries. Whatever the case might be, efficiencies are improving. And this does mean we have hope for EVs being useful for trucks in the future. However, that appears to be some time off, and appears not to be viable at this point in time. There's a promising future for EV trucks. However, at this point, they would appear to be of niche use and perhaps not generally applicable for most purposes.